Hey church. So this video is not a normal Sunday sermon, but we've been going through this series called Ask Me Anything, and you all gave me a lot of questions. I have them all right here. Many of them didn't make it into a sermon. I just thought for fun, why don't we just go through these questions real fast, and I will give my quick answer, and maybe that'll spark something in you to go back to Scripture and look at some of these things for yourself. And we'll go from there. How's that sound? All right. So the first question. I enjoyed learning about the seven spirits of God, which of course we saw in Revelation, the book of Revelation. Can you give reference and answers if need be? The only reference I can give to that is Isaiah 11, 1 through 3. That's kind of where we go back in the Old Testament to find reference to the seven spirits of God. And so that's my best answer to that. Go back and hopefully that is rewarding. All right, one down. Let's see here. Who created God? If God created everything else, then who created God? Quick answer to that is nobody created God. He's always existed. Even the way he presented himself to the Israelites was he is the I am, which means he exists. And so nobody created God. He's always existent, and there's many scriptures to go back to. All right, what did Paul mean in 1 Corinthians 9:22 when he said, I am all things for all men? That's a good one. All things for all men, so he becomes like a Greek to the Greeks, and to the Jew he became like a Jew. Really, this is kind of combating, I think, the notion that Judaism had, which said you had to become a Jew first before you can really believe. And I think that Paul in this instance is saying, no, in actuality, I can become like you and you can still believe. However, there was a caveat that he said that he was still underneath the law of Christ. And so that's non-changing. But culturally, he was willing to change for the sake of those around him. And so that's my best answer off the top of my head for that. Next one. Is baptism okay to do more than once? I guess, but after the first time you're just swimming. So that's my answer. I've had people who've done baptism more than once, and a lot of it had to do with their conscience. I think that's fine. But according to Scripture, you only need to do it once. Okay, when do we know it's time? Time for what? That's my answer. All right. The gospel is so simple. Why does the human experience make the gospel so complicated? Well, that's a great question. I think it's because of sin. Sin just has a way of getting into our lives that makes everything seem more complicated than it really is. And the gospel is a very simple it's a very simple step of faith to do, but it can be challenging living it out. And so that's my best answer there. Having any relationship can be challenging, right? Imagine having a relationship with God where he's perfect and we're not. So that's where the complicated part comes in, but I don't think it's complicated in the sense that you have to be a rocket scientist to become a Christian. That's not what the gospel gets at. It's simple. It's available for anybody. All right, next question. When is the last temple in Israel to be built according to Revelation? We don't know. There's my answer. My thought is a temple needs to be built before Jesus comes back. So anytime before that, there we go. Who is or was Adam's first wife? Was it Lilith? Okay, so there are some ancient writings out there that are assuredly ancient, that's no question, that talk about there being another woman in the Garden of Eden named Lilith, and how Adam was originally married to her. And I can't go into the details, I have to read up on that again, but something happened with that, and then Eve was made. Okay, all of that is not in our Bible. So it's just something that, if you want to look it up, I'm sure you can Google it. But it's really not in our scriptures. However, the word Lilith is mentioned in Scripture. I don't have a reference off the top of my head, but that Lilith is referencing a demon. So probably not Adam's first wife. Okay. What made you want to become a pastor? Oh, what an assumption. I didn't want to become a pastor. I wanted to become I was into robotics. I was going to be a person who programmed robots in manufacturing situations. That was my initial idea in school. And then God got a hold of me and said, nope, you're going to go talk about me in front of people. And that's how I became a pastor. And I love it. And once I jumped in, 100%, it's an amazing life. And I enjoy it, but I didn't initially want to be a pastor. It was a calling. We're flying through these questions, church. Is open or closed communion more biblical? Open or closed? Really the Bible talks about believers being the ones to take communion, whether it's open or closed in a church. I don't think that has any parameter whether it's more or less biblical. It's based on, are you a Christian or are you not? And the Bible warns us, don't take communion in an unworthy manner. Examine yourself. So I would say that it doesn't matter whether it's open or closed as long as it's Christians who are partaking. Okay, why are there different denominations? Great question. Why are there different denominations? Well, mainly because our church is called the Protestant Church. So if you get hints from that, we protest a lot. Coming out of the Catholic Church, the Reformers made lots of reformations, right? And started new Protestant churches that were protesting against the Catholic Church. Well, I guess we just didn't let that spirit lay to rest, and we just kept protesting. And so after a while, the Reformed churches began to split apart. And then they continue to split apart and continue to split apart. And we allow theologies to split churches apart. And that's generally where the denominations come from. And so I guess a sub-question for this is, are denominations a good thing? And my recommendation is to read in Scripture about what Jesus and the apostles say about having factions in church. And you make the conclusion. All right. Why is God invisible? Quick answer, he's not and he is. Okay, he's invisible to our eyes, but he's not invisible in general. So he is a very real God that can be seen, but can also be invisible by his choosing. And why is that? Well, a few reasons in Scripture. It says that if you look upon the face of God in a sinful state, you will die. So that might be a good starting point to understand why God's invisible to us. There's my answer. Okay, what does it mean to walk with God? And this is referencing Enoch, I'm sure. I don't think there's anything beyond the normal that we can look at here. There's no weird Hebrew word, as far as I know, that suggests that him walking with God is any different than us walking with God. And it's just living our life with him in a relationship. Why did Enoch not die? Well, we just covered that in this last sermon video. But the answer is Hebrews 11. Look it up. He walked with God and was pleasing to God, and there was a rapture there as part of God's pattern. So that's my best answer. Who has had the most children mentioned in the Bible? So there's one of two ways to take this. Either I read it like it says, who has had the most children mentioned in the Bible, which would probably be Abraham, Isaac, and then Jacob and his children are probably the most. So the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob's children. If the question is who has had the most children, who has been mentioned in Scripture, meaning what couples had the most kids, that's a good question. Don't know. Tradition has it that Adam and Eve had 25 or 35 boys and 35 girls, so 70 kids for one couple. But that's tradition. We don't see that in the Bible. That's a lot of kids. Okay, final question. Curious about, this really does not matter. Well, that's a great way to start a question. But in this age of skin color awareness, what color was Jesus? Good question. Pretty sure he's not the white Jesus that we see on all the Renaissance art. Probably a middle brown color. Best answer. And then the final question that we had in there was, in a world culturally that is very difficult to be a Christian in, how do we proclaim truth to people in the equality age, to people who are lesbian, bisexual, LGBTQ, without endorsing them? Because the question was, people who tend to reach out to them eventually tend to accept them and endorse them and say what they're doing is okay. And the best answer I have to that is always stick close to truth, keep the Bible right at hand, and don't waver from that. That's a non-negotiable. So, but that doesn't mean we're not kind to anybody that we run across. We just declare truth. So that's my answer. And I made this all in 11 minutes. This is amazing, church. So those are the other questions I had. A lot of them were really good. I just didn't see how I could make a sermon out of them. So hopefully that gave you some good insight and maybe sparked interest into topics in Scripture. All right. See you later.